If you pay attention to the housing supply crisis at all, you're probably well aware that they're building new residential like gangbusters in cities like Dallas and Houston, while our expensive, high-demand, supposedly progressive coastal cities almost seem to be going backwards. The reasons for this are complex and they vary from city to city, but I want to talk about one particular element that's in my wheelhouse, which is the traffic studies and impact fees that come into play in the development permitting process. You see, in my consulting career, before I started YouTube, I worked on a lot of city impact fee programs. I worked on a lot of traffic studies. You might even say I'm part of the problem. Well, today, just consider this a form of me doing penance. And what I want to do is try to add some depth and nuance to this idea you hear a lot, which is that cities in red states like Texas are easy to build in, but trying to build housing in states like California is expensive and slow and involves way too much bureaucracy. And actually, I'm going to use Oregon for most of my progressive state examples here, just because it is the state where I have the most familiarity with the development requirements. But my top line answer to this whole question is that building housing in blue state metro areas is time consuming and expensive because those cities have much higher standards for urban amenities in the built environment, where cities in red states are going to have relatively minimal development requirements. They really just want you to build housing and not contribute to improving the public realm because the places where they're building housing are places where it's expected that everyone is going to drive anyway. This is an overly simplistic explanation. There are plenty of walkable places in Texas and lots of places in California with terrible urban form. But in terms of development requirements, I think it's roughly accurate. And what I want to do today is expand on that idea and look at how it plays out in practice. And to do that, I'm going to talk about 3 transportation-related aspects of development requirements. So keep in mind, this is just a small subset of the overall picture. The 3 things are: 1, frontage improvements, so improving the public realm where the development is located. 2, transportation impact studies, which may result in off-site traffic or safety mitigations. And 3, system development charges or impact fees. They're called different things in different states. It's basically a developer contribution toward funding the infrastructure projects that are needed to accommodate future growth. I'll get into detail on each one of these elements, but first I want to talk about the legal basis for all of this, which is very US specific. If you study or practice planning and development in the US, you're gonna learn about the legal doctrine known as the Nolan-Dolan standard. What is Nolan-Dolan? It's case law. In Nolan versus the California Coastal Commission, the US Supreme Court said that there needs to be a rational nexus between the impacts of a development, in this case, a loss of public view of the Pacific Ocean, and the required mitigation for development approval, which in this case was a public easement along the beach. And SCOTUS determined there was no rational nexus. The development's impact and the Commission's required mitigation of it weren't sufficiently related. In Dolan versus the City of Tigard, Oregon, SCOTUS went further and said there needs to be a rough proportionality between development impacts and mitigation requirements. In this case, overturning the city's requirement that the plaintiff, a home improvement store owner, dedicate right-of-way and construct a public greenway to mitigate additional traffic and stormwater runoff. The cases themselves are fascinating, but what I want you to keep in mind is that terminology, essential nexus and rough proportionality, and how it establishes limits on what the government can ask of developers and what constitutes an illegal taking. Okay, back to development requirements. So I'm going to use Portland as an example. Over time, the city has expanded development requirements in order to meet climate, equity, and quality of life goals. This comes in a lot of forms, but let's talk about frontage. The city has adopted street standards that nearly always require wider sidewalks and more generous planting or furnishing zones than what the existing condition is. These are good things. They support walkability and mode split targets that are consistent with the city's climate goals, but they do come at a price to developers. Not just the expense of upgrading the public realm, often including stormwater and utility relocation, which are not cheap, but also in terms of right-of-way dedication, which cuts into the developable acreage and makes it tougher to get projects to pencil out. Let's talk about traffic impact studies. Just about every city requires some form of this for developments bigger than a certain threshold, and Portland is no exception. Essentially, the city wants to know, is the development you're proposing going to trigger new traffic or safety issues? So you have to go out and hire a licensed traffic engineer, go through a whole scoping process with the city, collect all the traffic data at all the locations the city wants you to study, and then analyze whether the estimated new traffic from your development is having level of service or queuing impacts on nearby intersections, or if you're adding traffic to locations that have safety issues, or introducing new safety issues. The list goes on and on. Traffic studies are not cheap, and if they find significant impacts to the transportation system, then you're going to be on the hook for mitigations like new turn lanes or traffic signals. Not cheap. And number 3, system development charges, or what they call in most other states, impact fees. They're one-time charges that are meant to represent a development's proportionate contribution to the funding of future projects in the city's capital improvement plan. And in Portland's case, they have SDCs for environmental services, basically sewer, parks, transportation, and water. The idea here is that the need for additional capacity in each category is driven by new development. There's a whole bunch of modeling and math that go into setting these rates. And then in the case of transportation, the rates are per dwelling unit for residential and per square foot for just about every other use. And all the rates are derived from land use trip generation estimates from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. There are a couple overlay areas in the city where you pay higher rates because of higher capital needs, but in general, if you want to build a 100-unit apartment, the transportation SDC alone is going to run you a little over $300,000, and that's in addition to frontage dedications and improvements, any off-site mitigations identified in the traffic study. And I'm not trying to say they're bad things. At minimum, they have a essential nexus and rough proportionality with the impacts, but I will get into some nitpicking later. So let's zoom out a bit. I don't want to be too hard on the city I've called home for most of my adult life. Portland actually made the national news in a good way a couple weeks ago because of the success of the residential infill project, a code update that allows development of middle housing, so duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, on land that was previously zoned exclusively for single family. In general, they're smaller homes, typically priced at hundreds of thousands of dollars less than existing housing stock, and they're now the most prominent housing type being built in single-family zones, with most of the production happening in very walkable, very bikeable, relatively well transit-connected inner East Portland. I've praised all the middle housing in cities like Montreal and Sydney, and I lived in middle housing the last time I lived in Portland. In fact, I actually made the first 4 or 5 videos on this channel up on the second floor of this townhouse before I sold it and became basically an urban drifter. By the way, the political battle over the residential infill project is fascinating, and it's kind of an interesting case study for other cities. And if you want a deep dive, I recommend this piece Michael Anderson did for Sightline, The 8 Deaths of Portland's Residential Infill Project. Link down in the description. So there's been some good news, but it's still far too little production to meet the city's target of 120,000 new homes by 2045, supply that's needed to make the city more livable for people at all income levels. So in an effort to incentivize construction, Portland's new mayor is proposing to waive SDCs, which in some ways is a giveaway to developers, but the question of who really pays SDCs isn't that straightforward. It's generally a combination of cutting into developer profits and the developer needing to charge higher rents to make a project pencil. Both of those things are disincentives, so if the jurisdiction next door, or halfway across the country in Texas, has a lower SDC or no SDC at all, you'll probably just go build there instead. So that's part of the logic behind what's a joint proposal by Oregon Governor Tina Kotek and the new Portland Mayor Keith Wilson. And the plan is to suspend all SDCs on any new housing development in Portland over 3 years or 5,000 permits, whichever comes first. Note that this isn't necessarily a slam dunk idea. Yes, a city study found that SDCs can account for more than 6% of total development costs for a new building, so waiving the fees can make Portland a more attractive place to build, but it comes at a cost. City bureaus are already facing a growing budget shortfall, and SDCs are a revenue item in the city's budget. So the question of whether to waive SDCs or whether to even have them in the first place is the kind of question planners and elected officials have to wrestle with constantly. And I want to get into a few of the more philosophical aspects of that question in a minute. First, quick reminder to engage the channel in all the usual ways. I don't promote my Patreon that much. I do post some written content there, and it is the least convoluted way to support the channel directly if you value what I do. Okay, enough of the technical and legal aspects of SDCs or impact fees. Let's zoom out and talk about some more foundational questions. For example, even given that they're legally defensible and have a certain logic to them, are impact fees on new development even a good idea? Or even more broadly, who should pay for growth? My observation as someone who's worked on these kinds of projects through a couple of different economic cycles is that local jurisdictions get very excited about charging as much as they can get away with when the housing market is hot. And then when an economic downturn happens, impact fees are kind of an albatross that keeps your city from growing and expanding the tax base. So I think I've come around to the point of view that the housing supply crisis and all the negative impacts that flow from it is just a higher order problem than having a temporary hole in your city's transportation budget. First, I'll quote this other article from Sightline by Dan Bertolet. Adding new homes to urban neighborhoods is a good thing overall, a net positive for people and the planet, not a transgression to penalize. Impact fees are regressive because the burden of paying them falls primarily on renters and first-time home buyers. I don't agree with every single thing in the piece, but I'm on board with that bit, and I'd even take it further. Impact fees on housing are a transfer of wealth from new residents, often young people and immigrants, to existing residents. There's literature out there that suggests that impact fees increase property values for all residents, which is great if you already own property and makes life more difficult if you don't. We probably don't need more policies that have that kind of effect. And the last piece of research I want to share here is this. Understanding how population change is associated with community sociodemographics and economic outcomes across the United States from the journal Frontiers in Human Dynamics. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, but the main thing I took away was this extremely strong relationship between a city's population growth or decline and median household income. You can argue over the causal direction here. Do household incomes go up because of the economies of scale and network effects that happen when you add more density? Or do people just move to cities that have more economic opportunity? I think it's not either or, and it's a whole dynamic, but I just don't think there's any question that you would rather be in a city that's gaining population, not shedding it. Because this goes to a core belief I have about what makes cities great. Prosperity isn't a zero-sum game. In fact, it's very much the opposite. Making it possible for more people to participate in your city's economy and its culture make a city richer for everyone. So are impact fees a smart way to fund capital projects when we're in the middle of a housing crisis? I'm thinking probably not. We have to remove barriers to housing development and evolve the way we think about funding infrastructure at the same time. SDCs are a relatively small part of Portland's transportation revenue, far behind fuel taxes and parking fees, and they're not predictable from year to year. Yet they have a big impact on a developer's decision on whether to build in the city or somewhere else entirely, and they're likely a tax on whatever renter or homeowner takes occupancy in the new building. As someone who has been an incumbent homeowner in Portland, Oregon, more often than not over the past couple decades, I struggle to see the downside in doubling or tripling the density of the walkable inner parts of the city. It's more foot traffic, more new businesses, more people paying transit fares, more taxpayers helping to pay for new infrastructure and services. Whether you already own a home or not, those things make for a better quality of life. Cities are just never zero-sum. You know, when I was working as a consultant, a lot of my work was doing planning projects for small cities. Well, one of the first things you do in any planning project is an existing conditions analysis. Those require a lot of data, and you would be appalled at how incomplete and out of date different cities' infrastructure inventories often are. They usually just don't have the staff or budget to maintain that kind of database. Well, this is where today's sponsor, Violytics, comes in. Violytics is an innovative AI-powered road management system that's transforming how municipalities maintain infrastructure. Their technology is already in use across hundreds of towns and municipalities in Europe and North America, making roadway system assessment much more cost-effective in those jurisdictions compared to traditional manual approaches. That means fewer potholes, safer roads, and healthier municipal budgets. The way Violytics works really is ingenious. Data collection happens using a smartphone mounted to a windshield, which automatically captures roadway surface images every 10 feet and uses GPS tracking and timestamps to catalog location. But what's really cool is what Violytics does under the hood. It uses an AI-powered algorithm to identify and categorize 15 types of road damage and detect issues with things like traffic signs, manhole covers, and other municipal assets. Violytics even does bike lane assessments. You can mount a phone to a bike, and Violytics will go to work taking photos every 12 feet and assessing surface conditions. All of this gives your city a comprehensive, up-to-the-minute overview of conditions in the public right-of-way. It's like Google Street View on steroids. So Violytics AI Road Management saves your city time and money, streamlines programming of maintenance and repairs, and helps you focus your budget where it matters most. And whether you're in city planning, public works, or just care about better streets, those are huge benefits. You can book a free test drive using my custom link down in the description and see how Violytics can offer you a comprehensive solution for increased road safety in your community. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons whose direct support gives me the freedom to just keep mixing it up from week to week. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, I believe, and I'll see you then.